It was one of those ordinary Saturday mornings, lazy, unassuming. Emily, my wife, was rushing out the door as usual, mumbling something about meeting her friend for brunch. She left her phone on the kitchen counter, which was unlike her. Emily was glued to her phone. It was practically an extension of her hand. I didn't think much of it at first. I was just clearing up the breakfast dishes when the phone buzzed. Then again, and again. My curiosity got the better of me. I glanced at the screen. It was a message notification from a messenger app she rarely used, Signal. That's when the pit in my stomach formed. The preview read, "Can't wait to see you again. Last night was incredible." I froze. My hands trembled as I picked up the phone. I knew I shouldn't. I knew it would cross some invisible line. But something in me needed to know. I unlocked her phone. Our passcodes were no secret to each other. What I saw next shattered me. There were dozens of messages from a man named Mark. Love notes, flirty exchanges, and explicit details about their time together. My heart pounded in my chest. Mark, her colleague. I'd met him before, shaken his hand, a friendly, charming guy, the kind you'd never suspect. But here it was proof that my wife, the woman I trusted with my life, was cheating on me. I put the phone down like it was a live grenade, my mind racing. A storm of emotions surged through me. Anger, betrayal, sadness, disbelief. But instead of confronting her right away, I decided to wait, to see how deep this betrayal went. Maybe I was in shock, or maybe I wanted to catch them in the act. Either way, the game had changed, and I wasn't going to tip my hand. I decided to play along for now. The days that followed were surreal. I felt like an actor in my own life, pretending everything was fine while my world crumbled around me. Emily came home that evening, her usual bubbly self, laughing about her brunch and telling me how her friend Beth was struggling with her dating life. I nodded, smiled even, but inside I was unraveling. That night, while she showered, I found myself back on her phone. My hands shook as I downloaded a spy app. I didn't even know I had it in me to do something like that, but I needed answers. I needed to know what else she was hiding. Over the next week, I became an investigator in my own home. I read every message exchanged between Emily and Mark. She told him things she hadn't said to me in years. How he made her feel alive. How she'd never felt this connected to anyone before. The worst part? They weren't just sneaking around for sex. There were plans, secret plans about something bigger, something dangerous. It started innocently enough, or so I thought. Messages about work, mentioning the company. At first, I assumed it was just the usual complaints about a boss or deadlines. But then they started using phrases like, "when we pull it off," and "the payout will be worth it." I read on, piecing together a sinister puzzle. Mark and Emily weren't just having an affair. They were planning to rob the company I had helped build from the ground up. My company. Emily had been privy to sensitive information over the years. Security protocols, safe codes, details about high-value assets. And it seemed she was feeding all of this to Mark. My stomach churned. This wasn't just betrayal. It was treason against everything we'd built together. But I couldn't let on that I knew. Not yet. If I confronted her too early, they might back out of the plan and cover their tracks. I needed solid evidence, something undeniable. So I started gathering everything I could, screenshots of their conversations, records of their secret meetings. And I waited, watching her every move while pretending I didn't know she was stabbing me in the back. Emily started acting even stranger. She'd be overly affectionate one moment, then distant and distracted the next. She'd lie about where she was going, who she was with. I'd ask if she wanted to spend the evening together, and she'd brush me off with some excuse about needing to decompress. Meanwhile, she was texting Mark about their next rendezvous. I felt like a ghost in my own marriage. Every smile, every kiss, every "I love you" she offered felt hollow. A performance. But I kept my composure, biding my time. If they were planning to go through with this heist, I would make damn sure they paid the price for it. It didn't take long for their plans to come into sharp focus. Every day, I uncovered more damning details from their chats. The heist was set for 3 weeks out. Emily's inside knowledge of the company's security system was the linchpin of their plan. Mark's role was the muscle, handling the logistics of breaking in, cracking the safe, and making a clean getaway. The safe. It was company policy that only a few people knew the access code, and unfortunately, Emily had been one of them for years. She casually dropped phrases like, "Don't worry, I'll handle the code, and just make sure you bring the tools." Every message felt like a dagger to my chest. It wasn't just about stealing money. It was personal. My business, the one I'd poured blood, sweat, and tears into for over a decade, was their target. And the idea that Emily, the woman I'd built a life with, was actively working to destroy it made my blood boil. Mark wasn't as careful as Emily. He bragged about their future, how this score would set them up for life. He even joked about buying a place somewhere tropical. My jaw clenched every time I read his self-assured drivel, but I reminded myself to stay calm. Their arrogance was their weakness, and it would be their undoing. Meanwhile, I prepared. I started subtly changing the safe's code and installed additional security measures without anyone knowing. A hidden camera near the safe. A silent alarm connected directly to my phone. If they were going to try this, I'd have the upper hand. I also reached out to an old friend who worked in law enforcement, Detective Harris. I told him everything. At first, he was skeptical. "Are you sure you're not reading too much into this?" But when I showed him the evidence, his tone shifted. He agreed to help me set up a sting operation. The plan was to catch them red-handed. Harris assured me that with the evidence I already had and a successful sting, the case would be airtight. Every evening, Emily came home, pretending everything was normal, blissfully unaware of the storm she was walking into. I watched her closely, dissecting every move, every word. When she kissed me goodnight, I could almost taste the lies on her lips. It made my skin crawl. The closer we got to the date of their heist, the more reckless Emily became. She started disappearing for hours at a time, claiming she was running errands or meeting with friends. Each time, I knew exactly where she was, Mark's apartment. Thanks to the tracking app I'd installed, I had a front row seat to her deception. She wasn't even trying to hide it anymore. It was a strange mix of heartbreak and fury. I loved her once, deeply, but now she was a stranger to me, a stranger who was plotting to destroy my livelihood. With everything in place, I was ready. I'd given Harris the exact date and time of the heist. I'd briefed him on their plan, down to the smallest detail. All that was left was to wait. The countdown had begun. The night of the heist arrived, and I had never felt more prepared or more hollow. Emily left the house around 9 p.m., claiming she was meeting Beth for a late-night coffee run. I didn't even pretend to care. I nodded, wished her a good time, and kissed her on the cheek. It was the last time I'd ever kiss her. The police were already stationed near the office, hidden from view. Detective Harris had a team of officers ready to move at my signal. I sat in the darkness of my parked car, just a few blocks from the office, watching the building's security feed on my laptop. The newly installed hidden cameras had already captured Emily and Mark sneaking into the back entrance. They moved cautiously but confidently, dressed in dark clothes, carrying bags that I assumed contained their tools. My heart raced as I watched them approach the safe, Emily whispering instructions to Mark, who fumbled with a crowbar and some sort of high-tech gadget. I felt a bitter satisfaction watching him struggle. They were so sure of themselves, so smug, but I had changed the game without them knowing. The first snag came when Emily entered the old safe code and was met with a blinking red light. She looked confused, tried it again, and then whispered something to Mark. He shrugged, gesturing for her to figure it out. I could almost hear the panic in her voice as she tried different combinations, her fingers trembling. They didn't know it yet, but the silent alarm had already been triggered. Harris and his team were on their way. Minutes passed like hours. Emily and Mark grew more frantic. Mark was now swearing under his breath, accusing her of giving him bad information. She snapped back, telling him to shut up and let her think. It was almost poetic, watching their perfect little partnership crack under the pressure. Finally, headlights cut through the darkness outside the building. The police had arrived. I grabbed my phone and texted Harris. They're inside. Safe room. Cameras rolling. Within moments, the building was swarming with officers. I watched on the security feed as Emily and Mark realized they were trapped. Mark tried to make a run for it, but the police were too fast. They tackled him to the ground as he shouted something unintelligible. Emily just stood there, frozen, her face pale and expressionless. I got out of my car and walked toward the building. Harris met me at the door, nodding grimly. "We've got them," he said. "It's airtight." I followed him into the office. Emily's head whipped around when she saw me, her eyes wide with a mix of shock and rage. She started, but her voice broke. She didn't need to finish the sentence. She knew. Mark, handcuffed and red-faced, glared at me. "You set us up," he spat. I didn't even respond. I just looked at Emily. For a moment, I thought I saw a flicker of regret in her eyes. But then she sneered, defiant to the end. "You think this makes you the good guy?" she said, her voice dripping with venom. "You're just as pathetic as I always knew you were." I didn't flinch. I didn't care anymore. The woman I loved was long gone. The chaos was palpable. Mark was still cursing, his voice rising above the commotion as the police restrained him. Emily, meanwhile, was a stark contrast, silent and eerily composed, though her clenched fists gave away her tension. She avoided my gaze, but I didn't look away. I wanted her to feel every ounce of the betrayal she had dealt me. "Emily Summers, you're under arrest," one of the officers said, pulling her hands behind her back to cuff her. Her face remained stoic, but I caught the faintest quiver in her jaw. "This is ridiculous," Mark shouted, struggling against the officer holding him down. "We didn't even take anything yet. You can't prove anything." Harris chuckled dryly. "Oh, we can prove plenty," he said, holding up a tablet with a live camera feed. "Every single move you made tonight is recorded, start to finish. We've got enough evidence to make sure you don't see the outside of a cell for a long time." Emily finally snapped her head toward me, her eyes blazing. "You set me up," she hissed, venom dripping from every word. "You couldn't just let me go, could you?" I stepped closer, careful to keep my voice low and steady. "You didn't just cheat on me, Emily. You tried to destroy everything I've worked for. You made this bed. Now lie in it." Her face crumbled for a brief moment, a flicker of vulnerability breaking through her mask of anger. But it didn't last. She quickly turned away, staring straight ahead as the officers escorted her and Mark out of the building. I followed them outside, standing just beyond the flashing lights of the police cars. Reporters had already begun to gather, snapping pictures and shouting questions. I stayed in the shadows, watching as Emily and Mark were loaded into separate vehicles. The doors slammed shut, and the cars pulled away, taking with them the last remnants of my old life. Harris came over, clapping a hand on my shoulder. "You okay?" he asked. I nodded, though I wasn't sure if I meant it. "Yeah," I said. "I'm just glad it's over." He gave me a small, understanding smile. "It's not easy, but you did the right thing. You stopped them before they could ruin anyone else's life." As I drove home that night, the adrenaline began to wear off, leaving a strange emptiness in its wake. The house felt foreign when I walked in, too quiet, too big. Emily's presence lingered in the photos on the walls, the clothes in the closet, the faint scent of her perfume that still clung to the air. I poured myself a drink and sat in the living room, staring at the ceiling. For the first time in weeks, I let myself feel it all. The betrayal, the anger, the sadness. But mixed in with the pain was a faint glimmer of relief. I had taken back control. I had survived. The days that followed were a whirlwind of fallout. Emily and Mark were held without bail after their arraignment. The evidence Harris and his team had gathered, combined with the live feed of their attempted break-in, left no room for doubt. The charges were severe: attempted burglary, conspiracy, and misuse of confidential company information. They were looking at years behind bars. I stayed out of the public eye as much as possible. The company issued a statement about the attempted robbery, carefully omitting Emily's involvement to protect me from additional scrutiny. The board had been supportive throughout, though the shame of the situation weighed heavily on me. Emily had been my wife. Her betrayal felt like a reflection of my judgment, my trust in her. Her first call from jail came 2 days after her arrest. I stared at my phone, her name flashing on the screen, but I didn't answer. She left a message. Tears, anger, and desperation all rolled into a single, rambling plea. You don't understand. It wasn't supposed to be like this. I didn't mean to hurt you. Mark manipulated me. Please pick up. I need you. I deleted it without listening to the end. In the weeks that followed, the media frenzy died down. The attention shifted elsewhere, and I could finally breathe again. But Emily's family wasn't so quick to move on. Her mother called me, furious, accusing me of setting Emily up, of ruining her life. She made a mistake, but you could have handled this differently, she said, her voice dripping with blame. She made more than a mistake, I replied coldly. She destroyed our marriage and tried to destroy my business. Don't call me again. Mark's wife, on the other hand, reached out to thank me. She had suspected his infidelity, but never imagined it ran so deep. You saved me from years of lies, she said, her voice cracking with emotion. I don't know how to repay you. You don't owe me anything, I told her. We've both been through enough. Meanwhile, my nights were a struggle. Sleep came in fits and starts, and when it did, it was plagued by dreams of Emily. Memories of the life we'd built together clashed with the reality of her betrayal, creating a storm I couldn't escape. I started seeing a therapist, not just to process the betrayal, but to figure out who I was without her. One thing became clear: I couldn't stay in that house. Every room was a reminder of what I'd lost, of what had been taken from me. I put it on the market and started looking for something smaller, somewhere fresh. A new beginning. The day I moved out, I found a box tucked away in the back of the closet, a collection of mementos from our life together. Concert tickets, love notes, photos from our honeymoon. For a moment, I considered keeping it, holding on to the good times. But then I thought of the lies, the betrayal, the cold look in her eyes as she was handcuffed. I threw the box in the trash. It's been 6 months since that night, and life looks very different now. The house is sold. I moved into a small apartment downtown. Not much, but it feels like mine. No ghosts of the past lingering in the corners. The company recovered too. In fact, we've had some of our best quarters yet. The heist scandal never reached the public in detail, so our reputation remains intact. As for Emily, she and Mark both took plea deals. 10 years for Mark, 6 for Emily. I didn't attend the sentencing. I didn't need to see her again. I thought maybe I'd feel some satisfaction knowing justice had been served, but mostly I just felt empty. Betrayal leaves a wound that doesn't heal easily. Some days, it feels like it never will. But I'm learning to live again. Therapy helped me unpack a lot of what happened. Not just the betrayal, but how I let myself lose so much of who I was in that relationship. Emily wasn't the only one at fault. She was the one who betrayed me, but I was the one who ignored the signs, the cracks in our marriage, because it was easier than confronting them. That's a hard truth to swallow, but it's also a freeing one. It means I could do better next time, for myself and whoever comes into my life. Speaking of, there's a next time on the horizon. Her name is Rachel. We met at a bookstore, of all places. She's funny, kind, and refreshingly honest, qualities I didn't realize I'd been starving for. We've been taking things slow, no pressure, no expectations. It's early, but for the first time in years, I feel hope. Real hope. Every now and then, I catch myself looking back, wondering how things could have been different. Could I have saved my marriage? Could I have seen the signs earlier? But then I remind myself that some endings aren't meant to be rewritten. Sometimes, you have to let the past go to make room for the future. I don't regret the choices I made. I stood up for myself, for what I believed in, and I protected the life I worked so hard to build. That's something no one, not Emily, not Mark, not anyone, can take away from me. If there's one thing I've learned, it's this: life is fragile and trust is sacred. You can't control what others do, but you can control how you respond. And sometimes the hardest thing is also the right thing: to walk away and start fresh. The storm has passed. The skies aren't entirely clear yet, but I see the sun breaking through. And for now, that's enough. Thank you for listening to my story. If you enjoyed it, please give it a like and share your thoughts in the comments below. I'd love to hear what you think.